Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is Chase Gilbert. I wanted to tell you about my story. I hope you can appreciate my narrative on it. I like to start where my mind was at growing up. I grew up in a Protestant Christian background, non-denominational Christian. I found myself up against the wall with the views of Christianity, especially coming from my father, and how he wanted me to really digest and understand and believe his views on Christianity. We would constantly have these arguments about different Christian ideas, the concepts of morality, and how can there be good without a God. I had a conversation with my cousin on some of the ideas of Christian mythology, if the world was flooded or not, some of those interesting ideas. It really made me think, and I was like, oh yeah, that is a really spectacular belief. I wanted to have the opposite perspective of Christianity. I wanted to figure out how to combat the Christian narrative and perspectives. So I started studying atheism. I studied Anthony Hitchens' others, and their perspectives were, how can there be a God if there's all these stars blowing up? Very different perspective. He talked about a lot of the things that have been done in the name of Christianity or beliefs or religion in general. That book by Anthony Hitchens was God is Not Great. It gave me new ideas and ways to combat Christian thought. It empowered me in a way to have something different to say. And so some of those moral conversations were, if a group of people on an island never heard of Christian thought or belief, would they be moral? But of course, from the Christian perspective, you don't have morality without God. I thought those ideas were silly at the time. Eventually, those conversations with my dad just ended up with me staring him down. I realized it really wasn't a reciprocal conversation. It was somebody else trying to force their beliefs onto me. Looking back at those times now, maybe I was in the right place, or maybe what really needed to happen was for me to just listen, just accept my dad for who he was at the time and what he wanted to say. But that was not something I realized until much later down the line. I eventually started reading other people. What I found was that with the atheist view was they were almost just as upset at Christians as Christians were with atheists, especially in that debate sphere. I didn't want to be angry. Anger was something that I was trying to learn how to tame in myself at the time. New people came on the scene, like Eckhart Tolle, and when I read his books, one was The New Earth, and I forget what his other famous book was, but what I took away from that was being able to better understand my family, better cope with family dysfunction. He definitely had a lot of good things to say about how we work with other people. His pain body idea was definitely very influential for me. Getting introduced to mindfulness meditation, one of the things he talked about was imagining a smoke moving through your body. I thought those were really clever ideas. He also introduced a more interfaith perspective. He used some ideas that were New Age, you could say Christian, Buddhist. He was bringing in a lot of different perspectives. Him introducing some Buddhism to me piqued my interest. I also picked up a Krishna consciousness book, and it talked about there being stages of awareness. One of those stages is an arhat, and that's getting more into Eastern Hinduism and Buddhist thought. That whole idea blew my mind that there could be stages of awareness or stages of consciousness. That idea brought me further down the line with a guy named Ken Wilber. And Ken Wilber, he had a radical perspective on stages of consciousness, religion, and an interesting philosophy. I picked up his book, The Meaning of Everything, maybe. He discusses his map of consciousness. He also talked about everything being a part of a whole and everything being a whole part part to a whole. That was his whole philosophy on the holography. And he also talked about stages that people are at. He tried to map that out. It was pretty esoteric for, I'd imagine, almost everybody, most people. But the idea, the creativity was something that I appreciated. Imagining that people going through their lives in these different places and these different beliefs, being on this journey of growth, that influenced me. I wouldn't necessarily agree with his entire perspective, but it was very creative. What that did for me was help me better understand people's beliefs in general and religions, my family, everybody's role in life. It gave me this idea that, oh, everybody is just at different stages of their life and perspectives, and with time, with knowledge and growth, they can move through these stages and advance. This was me being introduced to an Eastern point of view, but some scientific psychology mixed in there. His whole perspective on the transpersonal, on ethnocentric, world-centric views, that influenced me. Back then, I couldn't even really understand it. What does transpersonal mean? Later, I was asked that question, and I was stumped. I couldn't even tell you what that meant. But I loved hearing it. I loved hearing Ken Wilber's view. What I would say that means now is selflessness. And that when we go through life, we look at everything from our own perspective. And in this whole idea of personal growth in our journey, you can become more considerate of others. That's where you get the ethnocentric, world-centric. You're more concerned about your community, you're more concerned about the world, and so on. Around this time, I was introduced to a really great book, Sunrise Suzuki's book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I had also picked up a book on Zen Buddhism, listened to every Alan Watts video on Buddhism. Sunrise Suzuki's perspective felt like a glove that fit really well. He summed up how I already thought, and I imagine a lot of people think. Since I come from a musical background, I play drum set and teach drum set. Understanding life from this view of practice, that just made sense. That book was so meaningful to me. I could stay almost for an hour on a single page and get so much out of what he had to say. Getting introduced to Buddhism was such an important step for me. That slowly getting me into these ethical ideas of repetition and consistency. At the time, I was also introduced to the magic way of thinking about life. I had a friend whose mother was a Wiccan. She gave me my first tarot reading. There was an obvious divide from me and all my friends I noticed happening. Getting introduced to Wiccan ideas, one of those ideas was the energy ball. Imagine energy running through your hands, or you imagine a ball and the ball expanding. One evening, I sat on my bed, because this was some things that this Wiccan lady told me. I'm sitting on my bed and I'm doing that and I feel something. It's starting to blow my mind. I'm feeling this energy ball expanding in my hands. It radically had an influence on me. It just really blew my mind. I'm not sure if it was that morning, but the morning after I woke up and said the word Marduk. And I looked that up, and that had to do with a Sumerian god. All these different things influencing me started to have me looking at life in a very symbolic way. This Wiccan friend, she introduced me to her friend who was a self-appointed hedge witch, who was also a U.S. Marshal by chance. We had dinner together and we were talking about these ideas. One of the things that she told me to do was sit in a doorway, sit in a place between places. So I did that. I wanted to experience more from life. I wanted to investigate the ways that you can explore your mind and reality as we know it. It probably had to do with getting introduced to these Eastern perspectives on mysticism and also growing up religious. You're full of these ideas of there being something more to life than what meets the eye. So going back to the story, I did sit in the doorway. I felt something like a hand coming down on the back, comforting and massaging. Doing that once or twice, it piqued my interest. Like, what is that? Is that an angel? Maybe at the time I wanted to experience angels. And another time I was doing that and I heard the words Benedictine saints. I looked up the Benedictine saints and found their precepts. I was kind of getting further introduced to moral ideas. I was just exploring everything. I found a home in an interfaith perspective. Found myself joining all these different groups, the interfaith community or metaphysical community. I was introduced to a really cool woman who was a medium and channeler, and her husband is a massage therapist and musician. They had a meditation group. I joined that group. I was part of the metaphysics group in my local town where they'd have different speakers come in and talk about different topics, mantras or chakras, looking at somebody's energy system and their chakras, seeing what you could pick up. And other groups, there was a couple, and her thing was angels. She'd have these write-ups on angels, and her husband played guitar. She would summon angels and give us all readings, share what she had to say. Her husband would share what he had to say, and everyone would share what they had to say. I was taking in a lot of different new ideas and information. Why was I so curious about all these ideas? As a musician, I would play a lot. I would practice a lot. I would get into the zone. I would have a really beautiful enjoyment of that. But I'd be playing and I would always notice that there was still this feeling of stress going on in the background. Practicing the drums would never totally eclipse this feeling of discontent and negativity or stress that I was aware of. All this exploration into spirituality was me trying to find the answer to that. That's what got me into meditation and mindfulness meditation. So learning about mindfulness meditation or vipassana, you're paying attention to your body, you're paying attention to your breathing. And then in the new age, you have affirmations. I was just trying everything I could. I took classes on philosophy and started to learn about Western philosophy, learn about all these different people and their perspectives. I noticed a lot of them in their talks. In the background was always this debate about God, which was interesting, I thought. It could have been the times, of course. I thought that these philosophers are all so stupid. Why haven't they overcome this idea of God? Why is it so important to their beliefs or philosophies underneath it all? When I found Immanuel Kant, he's got a book called The Critique of Pure Reason. When I started to read that, I had the same experience that I did with Sunryu Suzuki's book, Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. Just a single paragraph was so powerful in depth, so dense and deep. I think I even started to just transcribe the book. Again, I guess it was this feeling of, oh yeah, this is how I think already. I think what Immanuel Kant's gift was, he was very, very literal. He took life very literally. I really loved that he tried to create this idea, this argument of objectivity versus subjectivity, what's metaphysical and what's not, as far as we can tell. He had these buzzwords, a priori, a posteriori, in your experience. He was touching on these different dimensions of how we experience life. And I would come back to him later, exploring all these different ideas. Honestly, it left me delusional in a way. I didn't really know what to do with all this information. I was just collecting it. It didn't help that I was studying all the New Age people too. Their out there perspectives. Drunvalo Melchizedek, Nassim Haramein, and all these guys just kind of throwing out these amazing esoteric models of reality. I was trying to fit all that in my perspective because I do love the scientific perspective. I love the metaphysical perspective. Going back to Carol's group, one of the things that they were doing was influenced by a really interesting guy named Bill Buehler. This work they called synergy work. What you were experiencing was a group meditation. Instead of everybody sitting there silent, you had everybody sitting with their eyes closed, but what was happening, you were talking about your experience as you were experiencing it. I have a feeling in my arm. I see the color blue. I was impressed with Carol's and some of the others' elaborate and amazing visions and experiences. Of course, Carol being in this position of a medium and channeler, she would have the Arcturians happening one minute and spaceships happening the other. You just never knew what was going to come through for her. And at that time, I just felt completely shut off, closed off from this, as if I had no imagination. But I had to realize that I actually did have a great imagination. And so some of these kind of early visions I had was this dial, or like a ladder, climbing up this abyss. Getting more comfortable being open and just talking about my experiences started to really just open up the door. And if you're somebody that has this issue, I'd say don't overthink it. When you think so hard about something, that's where you get stuck. If you said random things for the next 5 minutes, water, ice cream cone, love, you just have this natural ability to access whatever's happening and whatever you want to focus on. Everything doesn't have to be in a narrow little schema. If I mentioned a fire hydrant, or had you imagine a fire hydrant, what color is the fire hydrant? Some people would see the fire hydrant. Some people would get an experience or a texture of it. Some people will have an experience with the fire hydrant in a few days from now, as I'm kind of opening this door to them. Taking meditation seriously, sitting, trying to be free from thought, be free from stress, find relief, find freedom. When I would sit there, I would just feel this pain in my back. It was as if somebody took a spear and shoved the spear through me right here. It's like a golden line that just went out there. When you have these interesting experiences, you want to come up with some idea of what they mean. At that time, I probably thought like, oh, this is what must keep you embodied, your soul embodied or something. You know, your karmic line, or who knows. Further down the line, I studied some psychology. I heard these ideas of like dis-ease instead of disease. That's a funny one. Got introduced to people like Terence McKenna. You know, I think that guy was so close to enlightenment, or if he wasn't already enlightened. I really loved his eloquence, wordsmithing. He was bringing in the perspectives of psychedelics and what the psychedelics can do for you. And his incredible experiences, probably just as incredible as any religious book or passage on some yogi's transcendent experiences. That obviously piqued my interest, and I wanted to explore that too. I wanted to know that there was something more than what meets the eye in life, if there's more than what we can see around us. When I entered that territory, I started thinking about, oh yeah, some of the things in the Bible have so much validity. Jesus and his disciples. I was starting to see these connections with how relevant that was. I came full circle on Ken Wilber's ideas, and I was like, oh, everything is a whole part to a greater whole. To elaborate on that idea a little bit, the tin can that you pick up at the store comes from the distributor, and the distributor gets the metal for the can from some mine, and the mine's metal comes from the earth, and the earth's part of the solar system. And so this is this idea of interdependence or interconnectivity. That's what you experience on psychedelics. Why is that? It has probably more to do with how the mind works and neuroplasticity. Your brain's literally making new connections that it didn't make before. That's what the science says that psychedelics do. Further down the line, I had more experiences, some of them being much more what I was looking for, much more visual. This one time, I was sitting there, my vision was black, but that blackness became tangible like a fabric, and that fabric could be molded into an object. The color could be changed to any color I wanted. The object could become whatever I wanted, and then through that object I could enter space and experience anything I wanted to experience. And this experience left me very vulnerable, maybe for like 2 weeks, and I was like, oh, I'd never want to do that again. It had its impact. Any experience you have that has an impact on you, you experience the relevance of that further down the line. Going back to the New Age stuff, manifesting and healing. I wanted to be a healer too. I've always loved being one-on-one with people and getting to know them and trying to help them, counsel them, support them. So I studied all the healing modalities. I went to a group of Reiki practitioners in their home, did a group Reiki session, talked with a Reiki master, a couple different Reiki masters, took in everything they had to say. Eventually started my own healing practice with people that were interested, running energy, channeling energy, whether it was through water or on food, helping other people. I was in a psychology class. I have all these things moving through my mind. I started to become aware of this phenomenon happening of these pokes and prods on my body, getting more in touch with my feelings, my bodily feelings from meditating. I couldn't explain what it was. At the time, I had a very supernatural view on what was happening. I thought all these beings were around me, prodding me. I started to draw on a pad of paper. I started to draw these lines. What it ended up looking like was this system of interlocking lines. They went around the page. What I gathered from it, they were the energy pathways of the room that I felt. Being into the scientific perspective on life and what was modern physics saying, maybe they're the dark matter that people have been searching for. It's these energetic pathways. What's interesting about the whole dark matter perspective, that's exactly how they explain dark matter. They call them creation lines. These pathways where different material and energy gravitates to, and that's where you get stars and planets and so on. So then I thought, wait a minute, what if I spun this book with the energy pathways? Maybe I could spin the energy pathways that I was experiencing. So I did that and I felt something from it. Wait, why don't you create a wheel in your mind and just spin the wheel? The way I decided on what direction to spin things were, if I felt something on my arm here, then I would spin it, let's say, counterclockwise or clockwise. I would do this spinning of objects, or in my mind, spinning them in the direction of how it felt to my body. There's this paper written on Einstein and Bohm. They both experienced these muscle spasms, and through the muscle spasms, they would be able to read into them and gather information and insights. This whole perspective, I just really didn't know what to do with it. What I imagined it to be was some type of a healing modality to enhance an environment or a person, because you could walk around a person in a counterclockwise or clockwise way, or a tree. You could spin literally yourself in those directions. I thought that if you do that long enough, it has an influence on reality and on yourself and on the environment, and it makes the environment safer, like a white magic, you could say. If you're somebody that thinks like this, it's a hard life. I'm sure some people are thinking, oh, he's really delusional. And I was. It was making me go crazy when I was doing it. It was making me go crazy for other reasons, because my perspective on it, I really didn't know how to handle. Being a creative person, having an imagination, lets you explore territories that other people just would have no bearing in. So I find myself in power line fields, noticing the electricity on my arms, picking up my hair, and trying to feel into the electricity and absorb it as a power source. You know, that's one of these things from a magical perspective. Everything is imbued with power or energy. I met other magicians. They talked about putting your hand on a tree and absorbing the energy from a tree, or putting energy out of yourself into a tree. Generally, you know, the elements, water, fire, earth, air, all these things are imbued with power in the magic perspective. These ideas were making me go a little cuckoo. I just didn't know what to do with them, though I thought that they had really beautiful and powerful meaning. Life just never seemed to work out how I expected it to. Even though I had this really creative view on life, I was still trying to figure out how to be happy. Things not working out the way I expected them to. This more transpersonal growth side of life was hitting hard. My dreams kept failing me. I always had a plan A, plan B, plan C. My plan C was always to escape to some exotic island, right? Maybe live at a Buddhist monastery and become a monk, if plan A and plan B didn't work out. Not being the person that I wanted to be and trying to be the person that I wanted to be had me work through my honesty issues, wanting to connect to my higher self. And when I decided that that's what I wanted, then my life changed. I found out about a Buddhist monastery in Michigan, Dhammasala Forest Monastery, and I talked to the abbot there, and he said, come on up. At the time, I had just broken up with a relationship. I had been teaching teaching drum set for 6 years. Living on my own wasn't working. I wasn't getting enough money from music. The music business is difficult. That dream of becoming a professional musician was escaping me. Being an entrepreneur as a music teacher was just not easy. School, I didn't know what I wanted to do in school. I figured everything in my life's not going anywhere fast anytime soon. So let's go to the monastery. So I packed my bags and I wasn't looking back. And I ended up staying at this monastery for 3 years, becoming a novice. I'm so thankful that I did because it was such a grounding experience. And let me give you a little bit of information about where I was at before going to the monastery. How unhappy I really was. Trigger warning here. I was dealing with suicidal thoughts every once in a while. You could say it was a seasonal depression when the pressure was on and things weren't working out. I did think of killing myself. For many nights, I had a gun to my head, literally. And that had an influence on my nervous system. It was kind of relieving, giving myself that power and knowledge that you want to see real time travel, a single trigger and you're gone. Yeah, so I knew that life wasn't working out the way that I expected it to. I needed some radical changes, so a monastery seemed like the perfect fit. So I went there and, it was a really exciting time. I got to be immersed in a totally different culture and perspective. You can only learn so much from books and YouTube videos. You really got to go out there and meet other people, immerse yourself in what it is that you're interested in. That's what the monastery was for me. I got the time and space to learn whatever I wanted to and get to learn more about Theravada Buddhism. And before that, I had a very superficial idea of what all that was. Now, before I went there, I did join a Zen Sangha and got to have a video conference shortly with a Korean Zen monk and meet the Sangha in this area. They gave me a Zen koan. This Zen koan is going to be absurd to you when you hear it, but the Zen koan was, a student asked Master Young Men, if not a thought has arisen, is there still a sin or not? And the master replied, Mount Sumeru. It's fascinating to have this riddle or paradox for you to sit with and how your mind deals with trying to solve this kind of paradox. All the different ideas it comes up with. So I got to talk to the Zen monk about the question. I brought up my ideas of what the koan meant. He said that you should use the information in the koan to solve the koan. He said, what in the koan is as big as sin? The answer was Mount Sumeru. So that's a little hint. I'll return to that koan later in this talk. It wasn't until 4 years later that I got some insight into it. So here I am at the monastery. I'm studying chanting. I'm studying a little bit of the Thai language. It was run by an American monk, but it was Thai-based, and Thai communities supported it. Some Lao supported it. Americans supported it. I started studying doctrinal Buddhism and what Theravada monks had to say, watching all their videos, learning from my abbot and some of the other monks there. One of the main concepts in Buddhist meditation is this idea of jhana, and it's a very, very specific type of meditation attainment where you are single-mindedly focused on something, your breath, the feeling of the breath entering and leaving your nose, having equanimity for yourself and others, having goodwill for yourself and others, and being free of hindrances. There's a couple different hindrances in Buddhism. You have doubt, sensual desire, you have restlessness and anxiety. If your mind's not free from these things in this moment when you're meditating and doing jhana, then you're not in jhana. It's a very difficult idea. I couldn't do it just sitting. I had to walk and sit. Walking meditation is great because it helps settle the body, helps settle anxiety, and then when you sit down, you're more settled because of the exercise you did. Eventually, what I experienced was like a sphere of awareness opening up. I was checking down the list of things that you needed to be experiencing. Rapture in the body was also another one. I was experiencing all these things, and I held it for about a minute, maybe less, probably 30 seconds. Because as soon as a sexual thought comes up, you know you're not in it. And that's how I knew I wasn't in it. After that experience, I was like, so what? That's all? But I think the whole point of that is with sustained practice, you become a better person. You change your life, you change your mind. Your mind's more free and clear. One of the main things that I resolved was shutting down and shutting off this whole metaphysical view on reality and life. Taking a pause from that. This supernatural view on things is not what it looks like. It's not real. Whatever is happening with your body, that's completely natural. It's physics. That was just exactly what I needed to hear at that time, even though it was hard to take. Shut down your creativity. Looking at these things more naturally was important. Maybe it's like a hypochondria. I was just starting to get a clearer idea of what was going on. Looking at it through the Buddhist lens is stress. Again, things just didn't seem to be working out. I learned some valuable skills at the monastery. I worked on calming my anger, calming my anxiety. I was having panic attacks maybe every so often. I'd say maybe I went like a year without one. I'd have them every once in a while. Maybe I even went a year without depression. I had a month to decide if I wanted to become a full-fledged monk, go through that ceremony, maybe even move to a different monastery, and I decided that this wasn't what I wanted. 3 years was long enough, and I didn't know if another 3 years or how much more time I wanted to commit to it. Of course, going into it, I was like, I'm going to do this for life. So I decided to come back home. I tried to just jump right back into everything. Try to have relationships, get a job, just get everything. Everything that I was deprived of, in a way, at the monastery. One of the helping factors of leaving the monastery was reading Howard Bloom's book, The Lucifer Principle. It's a daunting title, but the book itself actually talks about a lot of really important things. How important connection is with other people. In a monastery, you're very disconnected from other people, having relationships. And the joke at a monastery is really that's the only reason people leave a monastery, is to have relationships. I wanted to connect with people. After like a month or two of being back home, working a hard job, running into difficult relationships again, I just had a breakdown and went catatonic. And I knew it was an emergency for me to talk to somebody. I just dieted in myself. I let go. But I wasn't happy. I found an amazing therapist. We talked. She introduced me to reframing, psychotherapy reframing. She helped validate how I was feeling and told me I was going through a transitional phase. She gave me hope, teaching me these reframing techniques to look at things in a different way and start to think positive, start confronting how I was conditioned to naturally think. I needed to keep hope alive. Instead of saying I wanted to die or hearing that voice and doing nothing about it, I started changing it. I started to say I wanted to live. This started to bring back my creativity. I realized that this was the same thing as affirmations and some of the ideas in magic. I reintroduced my creative perspective on life. I thought about these voices that I was hearing as something other than me. Because why would I want that? Why would I think that? I watched a Islamic video on jinns, on the 3 types of jinns. And that was like the perfect framework for this being that I was experiencing. That voice, it was a jinn, one of the dirtier types of ones. So I confronted it. I said, either you'll serve me or I'll destroy you. Coming back to the reframing, when I would experience that conditioning, hearing those voices, I'd say I wanted to live. This was all about empowering myself. Growing up, I also dealt with night terrors for probably a couple years. And I would wake up, but be dreaming and be hallucinating of this swirling blackness and these dragon shadowy figures just swirling around a black hole. I would just scream at this. Eventually somebody would typically calm me down and breathe me out of it. They were always triggered. Somebody would scare me in that day and then it would trigger one of these night terrors. Coming back to the reframing, that's been my journey these last 3-4 years, exploring what language is and what language can do for us. You could say that life, or reality as we know it, is language. I started with very simple ideas. I want to live. I'm stable. That one was very useful because it completely eliminated my panic attacks. As I continued to do this, I realized the relevance it had to a magic perspective, or somebody else might look at it as prayer. I felt like this whole new perspective on life was me coming into conscious awareness and conscious choice of where I wanted to direct my thought and life. Going back to Carol's meditation group, it's funny how your beliefs growing up influence you. One of the things that I had to break free from was this idea from the Christian perspective. Oh, meditation, you don't want to open yourself up to demons. That idea is such a mediocre view, self-limiting. You break free of that pretty fast the more you just keep going and experience life. Meeting people with new ideas, having radical experiences that doesn't make sense, that is scary. The whole reframing thing, I really started to go down the rabbit hole with it. And maybe it's just me, maybe I'm a little bit obsessive. Once I started to feel safe, that's another one, I'm safe. Once I covered my bases with these reframing, I started to go beyond this survival perspective. Started exploring other things. What did I want to see change? What could I use reframing in words to look at anything I wanted to? Whether it was my body or diet or extraordinary things. Eventually, I had a really radical experience. I was working at a park. This light on the trees just illuminated. Eclipsed, almost like a burning bush. The light just eclipsed everything in my mind. And maybe I heard my name. And then later that day, I was just walking around this shelter. Suddenly, my mind just became free. I was free of everything holding me down. The depression, the body, my mind was just free. That had happened only once before. Obviously, the jhana experience was a little bit of that. That sphere of awareness actually happened to me before that. I was just driving. I was just in the zone. I was enjoying what I had to think. Part of my awareness just started to come up here and leave my body. And I was driving at the time. I just noticed the car was slowing down. And so I had to come back to reality real quick there. So that kind of goes to show you that experiencing these meditative states aren't something that you have to do on drugs or be sitting and trying to do it on purpose. They can actually just happen on their own. Coming back to the story of this freedom, everything that I wanted in this moment was happening. I was enlightened. I was awake. I was free. Any adjective I wanted to throw at it was happening. The kind of experiences that I had with Carol and her group, and still have today, are also very mind-blowing. Some people say that you can experience DMT while meditating. You definitely do. You experience neuroplasticity. Coming back full circle to what I was feeling, these pokes and prods and muscle aches, I talked to another magic thinker. She said, oh, those are just other beings pinging off your aura. I thought that was a really cool idea. It was a nice explanation. I guess the way that I operate is I like models, and if a model explains what I'm experiencing in the way that makes sense to me, then it's a useful model, it's relevant. I started to look at this stuff deeper, how I was feeling. I have studied Qigong, and one of the methods that I started using in this early phase of reframing on purpose, consciously, was lifting the energy, as if lifting the burden of what I was experiencing, doing that consciously. That was just one way of dealing with this. I started to come up with a new perspective on it, that action itself finds the infinite. To understand this is going to need a little bit of context. As I progressed through this reframing idea, I really came full circle. The whole spinning idea came full circle as well. It came to my focus with an event I went to. I was in meditation group and I saw this vision of a Jesus-like saint with all these animals attached to him. Animal totems, like a man, but also a bear, also a fox, also a wolf. And previously I had done this whole spinning idea with a group of people, and I felt it had finally culminated to this point, this event. And at this event, I met this person who was like a very saintly, Jesus-like person. In a way, he was Jesus to me. My idea of Jesus is somebody who's enlightened. I was just following this whole symbology idea and these other ideas in metaphysics like synchronicities. I realized that there was other people that I knew that were enlightened. That realization comforted me. Going back to the reframing, I discussed these ideas in forums, learning what other people were doing. One of these groups was the Chaos Magic group. Returning to this magic concept, I was playing around with a couple ideas. One was, you need an energy source, you need an intention, you need timing. So I created like a formula through language. I thought to myself, why not have an infinite source of energy instead of these limited energy sources, water, fire, fire, earth, air. What this territory moves into is something called distant self-talk. They call it idealism. It's a third-person perspective. It's funny when you come up with an idea like this, and it brings you full circle again. Wait a minute, an infinite source of energy, that's basically the same thing as the idea of a God, or God, in the Christian perspective. It is a synonym. I thought to myself, wow, maybe this is the secret. This is why all these philosophers, very smart people, have spent so much time worrying about this issue of God. I would say that my own perspective of God, this infinite source of energy, is more of a mathematical view. We already have the concept of infinity in mathematics. So why can't you apply that to language? Another thing that I was thinking a lot about at this time was timing. This was an important part of my formula. Before you can add timing into your formula, what is time? I went down a rabbit hole of asking myself what time was. I saw a door open in my mind. I saw a gun. I saw the space between a bullet and the gun. I was being shown what time was. I brought this idea down to me. It manifested in some unique ways. It started with this TV show, which had to do with nuclear energy. That show was called Dark. I knew that nuclear energy was one important aspect of time. And it's ironic because on the way to visit the monastery, again, I passed a couple of nuclear power plants. So nuclear energy was one aspect of time. The other ways of realizing time was just talking to other people about the question. One person said, well, it has to do with frequency, and it has to do with the multiverse, and it has to do with era. I got these very exact experiences. I and others talking about the subject of time gained insight into it. This insight is the first door, but I'd say it's an accurate explanation of what time is. And that explanation is four things. So time is four things, four dimensions: nuclear energy, frequency, multiverse, and era. Physics says that nuclear energy, you have your strong and weak nuclear forces, you have your gravity, electromagnetism. I think bringing this realization down of what time was is an important step for everyone. Maybe if we better understand time, we can experience time travel. Wouldn't teleporting be fun instead of driving everywhere? Timing was the missing piece to this formula. Infinite source of energy, completely enlightened at all times. At all times. The intention there was completely enlightened. Here's where things come full circle again, with the Zen koan actually. After I started to better understand the idea of time, I thought, well, why not answer any other questions I have? I realized I'm fully capable of answering any question that I could imagine or consider. I was having a conversation with my sister about this, and she is also very good at solving riddles and very insightful. She's very sharp. So we were playing around with this idea, answering questions. I mentioned my Zen koan to her, and this is 4 years later after receiving the Zen koan. I think through her, I realized that what the Zen koan meant, whether you intend to do harm or not, harm can still happen. Another question I was asked was, what is stillness? I spent hours, maybe 2-3 hours, trying to solve this question. And I solved it, I felt, in a very clever way. I was driving a self-driving car at the time. Stillness is a not self-driving vehicle. This whole idea of answering questions, I think it has a lot to do with insight and relevance and accuracy. I think we're all capable of experiencing those things. I think everything has an infinite depth to it. You may understand that sand is what it is, but there's always more you can learn. You may come up with an accurate model of what sand is, but there's an infinite amount of knowledge that you could garner from understanding sand. And that's how science works. We might have an insight about something. We might have a mathematical proof or data on it. But there's going to be an infinite amount of knowledge and data that could be garnered from whatever subject we're interested in. But the open door. And this goes back to the missile analogy, that you don't have to be 100% accurate to hit a target with a missile. You can be 90% accurate, you can be 80% accurate and still hit. And that's how beliefs work and insight. How Zen Buddhism looks at life, pointing at something. And in Buddhist doctrine, you use things They call them sankharas, and sankharas are things. You use things to better understand other things and grow. There's skillful beliefs and there's unskillful beliefs, and if you believe skillful things, then you're most likely going to gain skillful things in return. That's the idea. The Buddha talked about it as like a boat. You use beliefs and your knowledge about a subject to get from one shore to the next shore. And then you drop the boat at the shoreline and you move on. Another way of looking at this, and this is psychological and Buddhist in another, everything that we experience is something that we simulate. We simulate it through our senses, and we gain information through our senses. That sense data becomes translated in our brain as sound, as thought. They call them the aggregates in Buddhism, in your body, in your awareness. And I love this idea of a simulation. What you think and do, you're basically simulating. That's especially the case with the idea of manifesting or affirmations or reframing, distant self-talk. You're simulating a way of thinking that you don't naturally think about. If you don't believe you can answer any question, then you never will be able to. If you don't think positive, then you never will. But if you open the door to it, you try it, then I think you'd be pleasantly surprised. With the whole questions thing, answering any question, whatever your question is, what is life? I would suggest taking that and saying to yourself, what is life? What is life? Just repeating that word, what is life, or what is my purpose? You just repeat that. With these affirmations, I'd say repeat them at least 30 times. Really put some time and effort into them. I think when you learn about affirmations from a New Age perspective, you assume that you can just say it once and it'll have an impact on you. But the way neuroplasticity works in the brain is you have to create new grooves in the brain and the neural pathways and connections. You have to repeat it over and over again. Repeat it for 5 minutes, 30 minutes, throughout the day, for weeks, until you get the answer to that question. This is how I explain receiving a question. It's like your mind is reaching for something. It's like your hand is reaching up a tree above you and grabbing an apple and bringing that apple down to you. If you repeat a question long enough, it's like you're bringing the energy of that question down to you. That energy and that apple can be insight, and that energy can be a manifestation of itself, where you go and have experiences where you get shown what life is, because that's where you're putting your attention and focus. Another way of this questioning is trial and error. Asking yourself, is it this? Is it that? Is life a hammock? Is life me sitting in a hammock? Is life me lying in a hammock on an island next to the ocean? No, it's not that. Life's a little bit more than that. And you keep going down this line of reasoning until you get insights that life is partly this, it's also partly that. You can start to get insights into questions that you have. It might seem overwhelming. You just give it enough time, you'll gain insights. Those insights will all collect together into an accurate model of what reality is. I think if Immanuel Kant was exposed to some of the Buddhist views, especially the modern scholarly translations of Buddhism, he would have found a common friend. It would be really cool to have seen what he'd have to say about that now, because I think he was just touching on doctrinal Buddhism, and I think he would have found a wealth of inspiration from the doctrine. Going back to Ken Wilber, his third-person perspective, looking at consciousness from a distance, like mapping it out and looking at religion, all these different people, Eckhart Tolle, Ken Wilber, they all helped me look at religion and people's journeys from a third-person perspective and kind of understand, like, oh, this is just where that person's at right now. Maybe that's just what they believe, that stage they're in. I don't even think that whole perspective is fair, but it's something I needed to have more compassion and love for people who had a different perspective than I did. It's not so simple to just say that that person's in a stage necessarily. We all have very different reasons why we believe what we believe. I don't think belief is necessarily a bad thing, but it can be if it hurts you and it hurts other people. Going into morality, a lot of the New Age ideas, they just skim the surface on reality. They are kind of superficial in a way. You're not necessarily going to learn ethics and morality from people that just talk about life. That goes for Terence McKenna, that goes for some of the other people out there, Alan Watts. You can very easily get away with whatever you want when all you're taking in and the people around you only care about doing whatever they want to do. I think it's empowering to be able to be in a position to be like, I can do whatever I want. That's not necessarily going to give you a moral model or standards, ethics. I like to think of this view as moral relativism. So I recommend getting deeper into morals and ethics so you can better understand your own standards and explore that deeper. Going back to the reframing, this third person perspective, the higher self, the infinite source of consciousness or infinite source of energy, infinite source of awareness, God, what's beyond the higher self? I think it's love. Going back to that little formula I have, why enlightenment? Learning what I did in the Buddhist immersion. What you think about, what you do, it can be harmful. That can go with affirmations too. If you're affirming a self-destructive view, a destructive view towards another, you're reinforcing that. You have to be careful what you're reinforcing. You want to reinforce good things. That's where this whole reframing topic has taken me over the last couple of years. I want a better life, right? I want a better life for other people. I also want to be able to explore my mind and what's possible. When you start to study language, you really start to find out what words really mean. What does the word cleanse mean? Well, you're most likely going to experience water or your laundry machine overflowing. Is that something that necessarily you want to happen very often in your life? Well, too much water, the hay bales are no good, flooding. So you have to be careful about what you want. Generally, things that are safe. This is a whole topic unto itself. How you go about things. What things can you do that are harmless? What thoughts can you have and actions can you take that lead to a good life and mostly cause no harm to anybody or yourself? What's the fuel for these things? And I tried to solve that problem with creating this idea of an infinite source of energy. The real fuel is stress. It's all these things that you feel, your feelings. That's the fuel. It feels so good to know that even though you're feeling bad, with a certain amount of time of reframing how you're feeling, that's fuel to make you feel better. Or at least to put how you were feeling before into a new context. Another way of looking at stress as uncontextualized energy. You may be feeling what you're feeling. You may care about why or how you're feeling that way. You don't have to get into it all and break it all apart. It's just information that needs context. Through the context, you will reveal what the issue is. The concept of light, enlightenment, that's probably one of the safest things that you can affirm. A lot of the things that we feel are things that are stuck in the dark. Shedding light on things might even cause a little chaos, but it's going to be relatively harmless. When I was first going down this rabbit hole of what enlightenment was, I confronted a lot of things that I didn't want to see. Fear of somebody getting sick, any fear. And there's really an open territory of creativity that you can explore with this whole reframing idea. Whatever you want. I'd love to get more in depth with anybody on that subject. Where that's coming from is figuring out what role you want to play. And some people don't want to have a role. They want to just let things fly, just be, just kind of let things work out or not. That's like a whole paradox unto itself. But I think it has to do with this idea of infinite awareness. Some people's role they want to have is to hold space and to just be awareness itself, witnessing life and not taking so much of a specific role. But reframing is more about being specific. You want a car, so you're putting your energy and focus in a car, or you want a happy relationship, so you're modeling that so that you can manifest it. Language is one method to manifesting. You have a specific thing you want. You want to be grounded. So what I would suggest is you're just paying attention to awareness around you, the awareness of your body, and you're just repeating the idea, grounded, just the word, or I'm grounded, instead of looking at things from a first-person perspective, actually using your name. Chase Gilbert is grounded, or your name. Of course, this can be applied to other people in your life. I'd be careful about going down that territory. Focus more on yourself. Start exploring what language actually means to you. You just repeat that affirmation. You see where it takes you. You put your energy into something long enough, and you'll get results, and you'll see those results. This is the strategy. This is done specifically to change your brain state, to see things in a different way, to see specific experiences. There's ways to intensify these experiences. There's ways to use more energy. That involves yoga techniques like the Mula Bandha, which is in yoga is called the root lock. There's ways to combine affirmations with shifting your nervous system. Some people have been showing how it's done with cold water. You could sit in cold water and repeat your affirmation while your body is shifting from the cold water affecting it. So your autonomic nervous system is being triggered by the cold water and it's releasing energy. And so that's one way of intensifying an affirmation. It's a bit laborious to spend more than 10, 15 minutes, half an hour repeating an affirmation like a mantra. You might be more interested in trying hypnosis, and I've tried hypnosis. I've found that's really remarkable. It leads me down those pathways to experience what the person is talking about. And we all do this all the time. We listen to music or we listen to other people that we think are cool, and those people have an influence on us, and we just start to see the world differently. You can make your affirmations into your own hypnosis tracks, and I recommend that because there's videos that I like. I like Michael Seeley. He's got a lot of hypnosis videos, and Jason Stevenson and others, but you're putting your energy into their ideas, and if you're a creative person, you're probably going to want to create your own ideas. Damien Eccles is another guy I really like. He's a magician and author, definitely somebody cool to check out and learn about. His book was a work of art. He went through some intense experiences. He found ways to really overcome them. This idea of the infinite source of energy, or action binds the infinite. What is that infinite? Well, here, let me give you kind of an explanation of what that is. Literally everything we do, think or feel, reading these words, opening a door, feeling anxious about COVID, smelling a rose, recalling a childhood memory, breathing, scratching an itch, is enabled by the signals sent between the millions of neural networks in our brains and bodies. Throw mindful conscious awareness of tasks in there, and that sums up my metaphor. Action binds the infinite. And that's a more scientific view on the whole thing from the concept of neuroplasticity. Pretty much sums up what I want to talk about. I want to be able to share with you some of my own hypnosis tracks that I've made for myself to give you an idea of what that's like. And they're not going to have music. I want people to be able to put their own background music on them, do whatever you want with them. I just want to show you some tracks that I've made that I use every day and have found a lot of benefit from. Give you some ideas on subject matters that might interest you, that you might want to consider and explore, because there's a lot of topics, and that's why I want to talk about these things with you. I want to open dialogue on a lot of these different subjects, and that's what my plan here is. Through this channel, we can talk about lots of different topics, things that we find interesting. I'll share my hypnosis tracks. I'd like to share some music with you. I want this to be a creative outlet. I want it to open the door for one-on-one conversations about different things, and also group conversations. I'm still sorting these things out. I started a Patreon page. I would love to be able to have some of you support me through Patreon, and we can talk together one-on-one. Maybe create like a Discord channel, figure out how we can communicate. That pretty much sums up everything I wanted to talk about. So thank you for listening to my story. I'm looking forward to sharing more ideas and topics with you and just talking about them. So thank you, and I hope you have a good day.